Hello everybody and welcome! Together with the announcement that Kerbal Space Program 2 will launch in early access on February 24th, 2023, we also got a closer look at the new user interface, or at least the current state of it. I already did videos on what early access means for KSP2 and highlighted 10 things we learned from the new footage that was released. If you haven't, you can watch both by clicking up top or in the video description. So why do a deep dive just on the user interface? Think about a car for a second. A steering wheel is an extremely intuitive interface. You turn left, the car goes left. The car goes over a bump, you feel the wheels pulling into the wrong direction and can compensate without having to think too hard about it. A game's UI should be the same. It has to give you the information you need to make decisions at the right time and enable you to confidently execute them or react to changing environments. People spend years of their life studying different patterns of how to best do this and how to improve on existing paradigms. This makes KSP2's UI special because there's not a lot of sandbox space games out there to reference except the original and maybe Simple Rockets 2, which took a lot of cues from KSP1. In this video, I'm going to look at the three main aspects of KSP2's UI. The vehicle assembly building, where you build your rockets and planes, the flight UI, which is available as soon as you launch, and the map view, where you plan your journey to distant moons, planets, and in the future also other solar systems. You can jump to each by using the chapter markers if you like. At the end, I will give a short assessment of what I think about the new approach and paradigms in general, and where I personally would like to see improvements. Before I get into each segment, some general info. The new user interface is going to be scalable at some point during the early access phase, but not on day one. That is one of the things the development team is currently working on. Now we got all of that out of the way, let's start with the new vehicle assembly building, or VAB for short. Similar to the original, we have an element on the left where we can pick our parts and cobble them together in the big area in the center. But aside from the new visual styling, there are some other changes under the hood. The main new feature enables you to build multiple sub-assemblies directly next to each other. You can build your main rocket and leave that in the middle and build a strap-on booster on the side and later combine them when you're satisfied with what you built. If I understood creative director Nate Simpson correctly during our interview leading up to the early access release date announcement, he said that they moved from a craft file paradigm to a workspace paradigm that includes all the different sub-assemblies as part of the same vehicle. Yes, you were able to save sub-assemblies in KSP1, but those had to be added every time you wanted to use them after loading the main vehicle. This new way of doing things should cut down the time needed to build more complex vehicles a lot. Something that has also changed is how parts are sorted. Unfortunately, we didn't get a good glimpse at this, but there appears to be some type of size category, from extra small to extra large and everything in between. I'm not saying that this is going to be exactly how parts will be ordered when KSP2 goes into early access, just that we have to be aware that the part inventory will not be structured the same way as it is now. Two things we do get a good look at are the sliders for modifying procedural wings as well as the UI for coloring your vehicles. As someone who has abused flags to make up for the lack of custom paint jobs in KSP1, this is going to be a very welcome addition for me. We can see the color picker and how the color is applied to a certain part or even the entire assembly. Notice the word assembly and not vehicle or craft? That's likely due to the new sub-assembly system I talked about earlier. So basically you will be able to color your boosters in one color and your main stack into another by just a click of a button. There is no obvious way to input hex values to match colors exactly to a template, as Matt Lown correctly pointed out in his early access announcement video. It sure would come in handy for all the hardcore replica builders. I know you're out there. Shout out to Gameplay Review UK at this point. Adam's recreations of real-world space vehicles in KSP1 are just fantastic and offer a stunning level of detail. If you like that kind of thing, go and subscribe to his channel. Okay, now that we have built a rocket, let's go and fly it. Here's where we have to turn our eyes to the new Flight UI, where probably the most significant changes were made. Let's address the navball first. Yes, it is no longer in the center by default, but you will be able to reposition it if you so desire. This will of course rearrange the elements you can see in the center of the current iteration of the UI, but we don't yet know what that will look like. I'll continue with the navigation interface for the time being because there's a lot of information packed into this element and around it. In the center we have of course a classic navball. If we move further out clockwise we have a more detailed view of our heading. Then an altitude meter that can be switched from ground level to sea level. Notice the two indicators on the bottom of the altitude numbers for this purpose. Moving on, we see information whether or not SAS or RCS are turned on and if we are in range of communications. And completing the circle, we see our speed, which can be toggled between surface, orbit, and target speed. The three elements on top and on the sides are what Nate Simpson called tapes in the feature episode, and they are designed to give the player a visceral feel of how fast these parameters are changing. If we go further out, again clockwise, we see a small scale from +100 to -100 with 0 to roughly -8 marked green, then around -10 yellow and everything below that red. This is your vertical speed. Basically you see at a glance if your speed will result in your vehicle touching down softly while landing or crashing and burning in a horrible manner. Moving along, we can see an atmosphere indicator. Full blue is of course sea level, while black is vacuum. People on the KSP forums have already weighed in on this particular element because it is not clear whether or not the tip or the middle or the end of the little rocket marks the actual position in the atmosphere. Forum user PoopSlayer78, classy, suggested this would be more meaningful with a little marker so players can better judge where the vehicle actually is. Personally, I think that's not a bad idea, although I don't see the current implementation as a big problem. But I would like for the little red exhaust plume to disappear if throttle is off. As it is now, this miniature rocket is always firing, no matter what your actual vehicle is doing. Continuing on our circle around the navball, we have our apoapsis and periapsis information. We can see their values in meters and the time until we reach them. In some parts of the footage released, there appears to be some kind of issue where the M for meter is cramped too close to the in of the time, making it look like min, like short for minutes, but on this screen we can see that this issue has been already resolved. The final item around the navball is the throttle. No big surprises here, except for a short glimpse of the percentage the throttle is set to right after changing it. To sum it up, we see a lot of relevant flight information condensed into one element in Kerbal Space Program 2 that was scattered across the screen in KSP1, or non-existent like the vertical speed indicator. Personally, I am a fan of this approach, but we have to see how it pans out once we can get our hands on it starting February 24th, 2023. And as always, let me know what you think about these changes. Would love to know your thoughts down in the comments or over on my Discord server. Link to that is in the video description. Let's take a look at the element right next to the navball. It appears to change depending on whether or not you are in surface mode or orbit mode and replaces the old SAS mode selector. Instead of normal and anti-normal in orbit mode, you can set your orientation to north or south in surface mode. Radial out and radial in become pointy and up or pointy and down. Prograde and retrograde stay the same. What we can also see is a graphical representation where our vehicle is currently pointing to in the center of this element. Moving further to the right, we can see the time warp element, which is pretty self-explanatory, especially if you have played the old Kerbal Space Program. Then titled Game View, we have three icons. One is Flight View, then Map View, and probably the Tracking Station View. We haven't seen anything of the latter so far. Continuing right, we have the so-called App Bar, which offers a few different icons, but not much to go on as of now what they do. We see one highlighted that is probably representing fuel, but we don't know what will happen when you activate any other icon, or if this is just a placeholder. Maybe these icons toggle some elements of the UI on or off? Your guess is as good as mine, so please sound off in the comments what you think about it. And finally, coming to the right-hand side, we have our staging UI. It is now on the same side as in the VAB, which I regard as an improvement, because in KSP1 it was on the left during flight and on the right while building your vehicle, which didn't make a lot of sense to me, to be honest. The big green button is for staging. It shows us the total amount of stages and the total amount of delta V that are left in this vehicle. Above that, we see the current stage with its delta V readout and the amount of fuel and oxidizer per engine. Now, here's where I think the KSP2 developers might run into the same issue that we had in KSP1. The maximum amount of engines we have seen are 12 in this shot of a landing on Val. But there are players, including myself, that build vehicles with a lot more engines than that. I've always wondered why the flight UI would display every single engine like that. Inside the VAB, you get engine groups depending on symmetry, at least in KSP1, not sure what the behavior in KSP2 will be. Usually these groups drain fuel from the same tank, so if there is a problem, it would be affecting the entire group, not just one engine. Sure, if one engine fails because it gets hit by debris or something, maybe expanding the group and flash that specific engine red or something. I never liked the KSP1 method where an engine would just disappear from the staging view when it gets destroyed. I would prefer if the game lets me know that there is something missing that should be there. Getting back to KSP, I'm not a fan of the thin fuel gauges here. I imagine if things get hectic that this is probably too thin to really register, but that is just an assumption and I will gladly test it as soon as the early access version is released. Alright, moving on up, there is the vessel resources indicator, which interestingly only shows electric charge and monopropellant in the screens we were able to see so far. Is this maybe not finished yet? Or does it not show fuel and oxidizer since those are present in the staging UI below? We don't know. Then staying up there, we moved left to the center where the portraits of our Kerbal crew are visible. Some players have argued that these take up too much space. As I mentioned, the UI will be scalable, so that could mitigate this problem. Also, one of the future improvements during or after early access could be an option to collapse these portraits. Personally, I think we have to see how much of a distraction they really are as soon as we can get our hands on the game. The way this new flight UI is designed, I believe our eyes will be focused on the lower part of the screen most of the time, since that's where the relevant flight information is located. So you might not even be aware of these Kerbals on top of the screen. Closing our walk around of the available UI elements, we come to the left-hand side of the screen where we have vessel actions. I don't really know what the raised hand means, but I guess the rest are lights, landing gear, at least it looks like a wheel to me, or maybe it's brakes, and the one below looks like a solar panel deploying. As for the X, your guess is as good as mine. Let me know in the comments what you think it could mean. Phew, now that we got our sweet time going through the new flight UI, let's look at a variant of it, namely the new map UI, which we can see here. Since it is very similar to the normal flight UI, I just want to highlight two main things here. First, see that sphere around the moon? That is a representation of the sphere of influence of this celestial body. This eliminates the guesswork out of your orbit planning because you will be able to see whether or not you are within the gravitational pull of a moon or planet. When not focused on the target body, the changes to the sphere of influence are represented by these new icons. On the right side you enter the moon's gravity well, on the left side you leave it again. One thing that plagued me in KSP1 was how all these events on an orbital path would overlay and make selecting one specific item very tedious. By extending them with these white lines, the developers not only improve visibility, but also make them more easily selectable in KSP2, one would hope. The other thing I want to talk about is how you will get from one planet to the next in KSP2. In the text accompanying the early access announcement, the developers mentioned a new non-impulsive maneuver planner. So what does that mean? In KSP1, a maneuver was calculated for a single point on your trajectory. Meaning, if your interplanetary transfer burn requires 2000 meters per second of delta V, the game calculated it as if you were able to unload all of the required energy for that maneuver in an instant. Therefore, you had to start your burn before the actual maneuver node and continue burning afterwards and hope you end up where you want to go. The further away your target was, the harder this got. KSP2, on the other hand, takes the required acceleration into account, including the change in trajectory that this acceleration will itself cause. No more start your maneuver X minutes before the node, just wait until you reach the designated point in your orbit and start your burn when the countdown hits 0. This way, we should be able to reach our destinations a lot easier than before. And that improvement will be invaluable when it comes to interstellar travel and the vast distances players will have to traverse. Okay, this video is already a lot longer than I originally planned for, but I hope you guys got some valuable information out of it. Before we come to an end though, I want to quickly talk about what criteria I would judge the new KSP2 UI against. First, will the new UI enable players to recognize quicker what their current situation in-game is? Second, will the new UI enable players to make the right decision more confidently? In the end, the answers to these questions will decide whether or not the new UI is well designed, no matter what any of us think about specific color scheme or graphical style. Remember my steering wheel analogy at the start of this video. Unless you can get your hands on the actual game, any discussions about the real-world usability of this can only be based on assumptions. Me personally, I use the mod Kerbal Engineer Redux extensively when playing KSP1. It offers additional information I cannot get by using the normal user interface, or at least not in such a condensed form. So far, I can already see a lot of stuff that I need within the new KSP2 user interface. One thing I haven't seen yet, and I would really like to see, is a thrust-to-weight ratio readout somewhere. For me, this is important to see if I need to throttle up or down, especially during landing, or when punching through an atmosphere. Too much thrust to weight can result in too much drag and reduce efficiency, especially when attempting an Eve return ascent. Also, when flying VTOL planes, seeing my thrust to weight numbers really helps me decide what I need to do next. Alright, that was my deep dive into the new user interface of Kerbal Space Program 2. What do you think about all of the new or changed stuff within the new UI? Let me know in those comments or on my Discord server. As I said, link is in the description. And if you enjoy these types of videos or want to support my channel going forward, since I will be doing a lot of KSP2 content as soon as I can play the game, you can also go over to my Patreon site. Either way, I really appreciate that you were sitting through this rather long video right until the end. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel for more and follow me on my social thingies. The links are in the description. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.